Dan Carson had to admit that his curiosity was piqued. Ben Stevens had asked to meet him at Megan's cafe. He hadn't seen Ben in years, though they had once been good friends. Dan was sipping a beer when Ben walked into the bar. They shook hands, after which Ben asked the bartender for a draft beer. Dan waited patiently for Ben to return and take a seat. "I know you're probably wondering why I asked you to meet me tonight. I wish I had better news, but what is," Ben began. "We've known each other for 18 years, give or take. We weren't bad friends years ago, but we've never been as close as our wives." Dan felt a knot forming in his stomach. He immediately wondered what news Ben had for him and how bad it could be. "You can't start with a comment like that and then change the subject," Dan stated. "Do you have bad news about Angie or Dana or both of them? Did you have an accident or something?" "I guess you could call it an accident. I don't know if you remember my army buddy, Glenn Thomas, but he called me 2 days ago with some bad news. His daughter, Julie, works on a cruise ship. She's a bartender on the Sea Princess, the same ship our wives are on. Like I said, Glenn and I were in the army together and became best friends. We always had each other's backs." "How does any of this concern me?" demanded Dan. "Does Angie have a problem or is she hurt?" "I'm dealing with it. It's damn hard for me, but I think you should know. Our wives seem to be on some kind of sexual journey," Ben said, wiping a lone tear from his cheek. "What the hell are you talking about? Our wives wouldn't cheat on us, especially with their other girlfriends going on the same cruise. They'd never be able to keep it a secret." "They don't have to, Dan. All 5 of them will have brains on this fucking ship," Ben replied. "They each have their own room and a male friend lives with them." "What makes you so damn sure of that?" asked Dan. "Maybe Julie saw something she misinterpreted. I don't think she even knows Angie. I bet when the facts come out, you'll feel really stupid about these accusations." Julie recognized Dana the same night they set sail. She and the other 4 were at the bar where Julie worked. Dana didn't recognize her, but Julie obviously did, Ben added. All 5 of them had been drinking a lot and were having a pretty rambunctious conversation. The gist of it was that they were going to bed the 5 lucky bastards Michelle had picked up for them. "You know they were in the same sorority in college?" Ben continued. "It seems they made a pact then that they would get together in 25 years to have a week of casual sex with men who weren't their husbands or boyfriends." The women had been drinking and talking at the bar for almost an hour when 5 men approached them. They took their drinks to a table too far away for Julie to hear their conversation, said Ben. She could see them just fine, though, and they were making out with the guys like high school girls at prom. "I'm sure you mean well, Ben. You traveled quite a distance today to tell me this, but I still have some doubts. Your friend's niece doesn't know Angie. Maybe she wasn't part of that group," Dan reasoned. "I'm not going to break up a 20-year marriage because your friend's daughter saw your wife and thought one of the women with her was Angie. That's too much of a stretch. I trust Angie unconditionally." "I realize that," Ben agreed. "Hell, Julie saw Dana a few times when she was younger, but I still couldn't bring myself to believe what Glenn told me about what she saw and heard. Julie was 13 the last time she saw Dana. Since then, Julie had changed her hair color and grown up. She was sure Dana didn't recognize her. You know how bartenders and wait staff become almost invisible to most of us as we go about our days. When I told Glenn that I thought Julie was mistaken, he replied that he thought so and showed me a dozen pictures that Julie had surreptitiously taken on her phone. They definitely had Angie and Dana and the other 3 fucking sluts in them," Ben practically growled. "You have the pictures?" Dan asked. "Even so, sitting at a bar with friends on a cruise ship doesn't prove infidelity. There could be another explanation." "I thought so too until Glenn sent me the pictures. They were so horrible that I had a sleepless night," Ben admitted. "Since I couldn't sleep, I had a lot of time to reflect on it. I thought about Rob Hansen, Josie's husband. You know he's from the old Capitol and no small amount of it. I remembered that Dana once told me that he made Josie sign a prenup. It occurred to me that a wealthy man who might have an unfaithful wife might have the inclination and ability to investigate the situation. I called him first thing the next morning. To say he was interested is an understatement." "He agreed to look into it?" asked Dan. "I wonder if he'll be able to find out anything since they're at sea. He can't invite a detective aboard. It's a 5-day cruise to nowhere. He doesn't have a single port of call. Angie told me that these 5 women just wanted to spend time together like old times. She never said anything about them all having fun like they did when they were students. Like I said, he has money, and a lot of it. He knows a guy who can do the impossible for a substantial fee, Ben revealed. His assistant found out there was a vacationing private investigator on the ship. They negotiated a fee, and by noon, the detective was on the job. Judging by your glum attitude, I'll bet the private investigator got information on Josie, Dan suggested. Since those 5 are together so often, they must have some evidence against them. That's exactly what it was. They weren't very discreet as soon as they left port. Hansen sent me tons of pictures and videos. Our wives are freaking stars. I mean that literally, Ben stated. How did he get access to their rooms? Asked Dan. I don't think it's legal, or at least not admissible in court. What the hell are you talking about? Demanded Ben. There's no fault in most states, including the one we live in. It was enough for me to see Dana with her lover to realize my marriage was over. I don't need to prove anything to anyone else. I'll show her some highlights so she won't try to talk herself out of a divorce, Ben stated. I think she'll be quite reasonable when she realizes the havoc I could wreak on her career and family. I can't argue with your logic, Dan reluctantly admitted. I hope one of the reasons we're meeting today is so you can hand me the files showing my loving wife's promiscuity. Yes, I have a flash drive with everything including Dana, Michelle, Josie, and Taylor, Ben replied as he handed the device to Dan. Taylor is already divorced, so she won't be hurt much, if at all. Hansen told me he's dropping Josie like a bad habit. I know I can't stay married to Dana after such a betrayal. This was planned 25 years ago. Can you believe this shit? It certainly puts a lot of strain on my marriage, Dan agreed. If the evidence is as damning as you say, I can't imagine staying married. I've never heard of women planning to cheat on their husbands before even meeting them. I wonder if we'll be able to use the video from the room in possible lawsuits. You're fixated on hoping that the law will somehow save your ass, Ben stated. If it makes you feel any better, Hansen said he'll give us permission to use anything he provides us. Remember when his wife booked a cruise and paid for all the rooms so they could have an adjoining unit? Our wives refunded her money, but all the rooms were booked on one of Rob Hansen's credit cards. He gave a private detective permission to install electronic devices in the rooms. Since the detective couldn't buy that shit on the ship, he used his phones, his wife's phones, and his brother-in-law's phones to tap the rooms and ferret out information on the cheating bitches. It took 2 nights, since there were 5 whores and only 3 phones, but the guy made his money. Tonight, Hansen was going to contact Michelle's husband. He suggested that we all get our heads together before we let the women know the matter was unclean. He said we need to find a savvy attorney immediately and follow his recommendations. Dan was shocked at all the information Ben had given him. His wife was a cheating whore, and he urgently needed a lawyer to protect his interests. A few hours ago, he had been searching the internet for ideas for Angie's birthday party. Now that problem no longer concerned him. I don't know what to say, Dan admitted. I'm stunned. I hate to thank you for putting me on the spot, but I'm damn grateful that you know what's really going on. I've got a lot to think about. Angie's coming home on Saturday, so I need to start working on it tomorrow morning. I'm sorry, Dan, to have to tell you this, but you should know, Ben replied, extending his hand. They shook hands briefly and went their separate ways. Saturday morning found Angie excited to get home. The cruise with her friends had given her great pleasure. She thanked Michelle several times for picking such passionate and experienced men for the week's activities. Michelle had promised that she could handle this part of the contract 25 years ago, and she had more than fulfilled her promise. Angie wanted to reconnect with Dan after all the sex she had enjoyed with other men. Everyone involved had agreed that this was a one-time thing, and none of the men would ever try to contact the woman again. It was safer that way. Angie knew that Dan would be eager for sex. After all, they had been separated for a whole week. He was a good man and a patient lover, but he lacked the stamina and enthusiasm of the slightly younger men who had spent the week with her and her friends. She looked forward to slow, gentle lovemaking with her husband. She made every effort to put the others behind her and concentrate on pleasing her husband. He deserved to be rewarded. Angie texted Dan that she'd be home by noon and was surprised that Dan wasn't there to greet her upon her return. As she dragged her luggage from the garage into the house, she realized something was wrong. Was it her conscience, or was something really wrong? Angie decided not to dwell on it and carried her suitcases up the stairs to her bedroom. She was torn between taking a relaxing hot shower and unpacking her suitcases. She hated this part of traveling, but still decided not to procrastinate and put away her nice clothes and turned in what needed to be washed to the laundry room. Angie took a long, relaxing shower and was a little stunned that Dan wasn't home yet. It was unusual for him. They had agreed not to call each other while she was on the cruise except in emergencies. That wasn't unusual for them. Talking on the phone never appealed to either of them, so they usually waited until they were reunited to share any news. As the day went on, Angie grew more and more concerned. She tried to call Dan several times, but her calls always went to voicemail. Toward evening, Angie called her daughter, Monica, who was a freshman in college. "Hi, Mom," Monica greeted her emotionlessly. "Hi, honey," Angie replied cheerfully. "I'm back from my cruise and thought I'd see how you were doing. I've missed you every day." "Have you talked to Daddy yet?" Monica replied immediately. Discouraged by her daughter's terse response, Angela admitted that she hadn't. "He's not answering his cell phone and he's not home, so I haven't seen him yet. Do you have any idea where he might be?" "I really don't know, Mom. I think you should talk to him before we talk," Monica stated emphatically and disconnected the call. Angie tried several times to call Monica back, but her calls went straight to voicemail. Angie's concerns about the cruise began to creep into her thoughts. Dan had no way of knowing the events of the past week. All 5 women were sworn to secrecy until the day they died. It was almost 6 when Angie heard the garage door open. She was sitting at the kitchen table facing the garage door when Dan entered the house. Not knowing exactly what was going on, Angie decided to act normal. That meant letting Dan know that it pissed her off that he hadn't been home when she returned from vacation and that he hadn't returned her calls or texted her. "Why didn't you return my calls or at least my texts?" demanded Angie before Dan could sit down. "I was worried about you. You've never blown me off like this before, and I want an explanation." "The short answer is this. You're a goddamn cheating whore, unworthy of any effort I might have made on your behalf. I'm sure you'll get the long answer out of me before this is over." Angie made no attempt to hide her shock and horror at Dan's statement. "How can you call me, your wife of over 20 years, a whore? An apology is needed, and I mean right now." "I agree, although it won't help," Dan replied. "I can't wait to hear it, so try to make it sound believable." "I meant you owe me an apology, asshole," Angie growled. "I thought we were going to go upstairs and satisfy our restrained desires, but now that's not going to happen." "That's good to know," Dan snapped back. "I won't have to risk STDs. Angie had tried to pretend she hadn't understood Dan's remark about being a slut, but now realized that he was guessing what was going on during the cruise. She decided to act differently. "Why are you being so rude, honey? We've been separated for a whole week, and I thought you'd be happy to see me. Why all the rude insults?" "What you call insults, I call facts. You don't have to pretend anymore, Angie. The cat's out of the bag, or maybe I should say you're up for grabs," Dan replied sarcastically. "You spent the entire cruise being had in all directions. Wait a minute, I was wrong. You're as much of a jerk as anyone I've ever met." "You think I had sex with some man while I was on the cruise? Is that what this is about?" Angie asked, eager to take the high ground. "You can ask any of the girls. They'll tell you that I was completely faithful. I've never flirted with men, although there have been quite a few who have shown interest. I take my vows seriously." "I don't doubt it," Dan replied with a grim smile. "You made a vow to your friends that you'd get your brains blown out this year, and you've kept it. I can't tell you how proud I am of that. I only wish you had taken our marriage vows as seriously." "Dan, someone is giving you bad information. They must be trying to break us up. They have some unknown agenda," Angie reasoned. "Angie, I have always been faithful to you. I made this marriage for the long haul, but you were making plans to cheat on me or whoever could be your husband before we even met. That's not the worst of it. You kept your vows. I don't need to tell you that those 2 vows are extremely contradictory." Who told you about that stupid pact? It was made one night when we drank too much freshman year. Neither of us took it seriously. I would never cheat on you, Angie insisted. I gotta hand it to you. You came up with some impressive bullshit in an attempt to avoid the truth. You won't gaslight me again, Angie. I've lived in an alternate reality for the entire 20 years we've been married, but now I live in the real world, Dan stated. Your version of how the world works was less painful, at least until I learned the truth. I won't knowingly live a lie, and I won't live with a liar. I got home a little late because I was doing the paperwork for the apartment on Jackson Street. I guess you haven't looked in my closet, but it's practically empty. I'm divorcing you. The papers are due next week. Go through them. Hire your lawyer and let's get this settled, Dan suggested. There's no point in giving the lawyers more money than they need. Dan, why won't you listen to me? Pleaded Angie. Your imagination is destroying your ability to think clearly. There is no reason to be angry or even jealous. I didn't do anything inappropriate on that ship. We may have had too much to drink, but neither of us broke our wedding vows. Somehow I thought we could have a civilized conversation about this mess. I was hoping you'd explain to me how you managed to so easily shit on me and our marriage, Dan said firmly. I'm done with this crap. With those words, Dan stood up and walked out into the garage. Angie heard his car start and the overhead door open with a rumble. Soon she heard the door close again, followed by silence. She snapped out of her trance when the phone rang. It was Dana. Angie decided to answer it, hoping her friend had some information about how much her husbands knew. Angie, we're screwed, exclaimed Dana. You thought we got screwed big time on the ship, but that's nothing compared to what our husbands are going to do to us. What are you talking about? Demanded Angie. Ben told me that all of the husbands have pictures and videos of us having sex with the guys Michelle supplied, Dana revealed. They even have the guys' names and addresses. It's going to be epic sex. Ben said he's going to divorce me as soon as possible. What are we going to do? Shit! Exclaimed Angie, mulling over her friend's words. How could they know? Where did they get the video from? Surely Ben must be bluffing. I thought so too, until he showed me the video. It's hard to dispute facts like that. Ben is furious. I don't think he'll forgive me for this mistake. Damn it. I wish I'd known about this sooner. I just swore to Dan that we were all faithful to our husbands on the cruise. Looks like I'm about to get divorced too. Shortly after Angie disconnected from Dana, she received a call from Monica. Daddy said he talked to you about divorce. He also said you denied everything. I told him that you would if he didn't show you the pictures and videos first. Monica, it was a mistake. We had too much to drink. Those guys forced themselves on us when we were in a weakened state. Can't you ever tell the truth about anything? Those guys didn't force themselves on you, especially for 5 days. You were enjoying it. All your friends liked it, Monica added. You planned to cheat on Daddy when you went on vacation with your friends. Now Daddy is divorcing you. I'm glad I'm out of the house and going to college. It won't be such a big problem for me. Dad told you about the videos and pictures? Asked Angie meekly. I insisted that he send me some of the more offensive videos, or I wouldn't have believed what he told me. I never knew you liked being spanked, Mom. Did you see that? Angie gasped. Your father shouldn't have let you watch that video. I really didn't like being spanked. I told the guy to stop. Well, in your lover's defense, your words sounded kind of slurred, like you had balloons in your mouth or something, Monica replied. Oh no, I'm going to sue whoever made those videos, Angie promised. It's an invasion of privacy. They had no right to put any electronic device in my room. It wasn't supposed to be seen by anyone. Good luck with that, Mom. Cynics might suggest that married women shouldn't be doing this sort of thing, at least not with men who aren't their husbands, Monica observed. That would avoid awkwardness, don't you think? I'm not going to discuss the subject with you again, Angie declared. I have to find out what my friends know and see if we can prevent these videos from leaking all over the internet. Over the next few hours, Angie learned how the videos were made and who authorized the placement of recording devices in the cabins. The 4 friends accused Josie of not recognizing Julie, whom she hadn't seen since she was a teenager. Angie literally begged Dan to forgive her. She felt that he should consider that she had been a faithful, loving wife for 20 years before she had stumbled only once. There was no way Dan could accept the planned disrespect. Angie didn't have sex with these men because she was drunk or high. It had been planned in advance, and she had willingly and eagerly participated. He apologized to Angie's elderly parents for simply not being able to trust Angie. Without trust, they had nothing to build a relationship on. Monica rarely came home from college, and when she did, she was very cool to her mother. In a fit of desperation, Angie decided to seek help. She realized that her behavior was self-destructive and completely inappropriate. "I'm glad to hear that you got counseling, Angie. What you did was completely wrong. You need to figure out what triggered your behavior and learn to control it," Dan told her. "You will never have a strong relationship with anyone, including your daughter and your parents, until you get your life under control. You have to rebuild respect and trust, and that takes time." 3 weeks before the divorce was to become official, Angie was in a car accident. She was sobbing over her situation when she ran a red light. A pickup truck slammed into the driver's side door, trapping her in the car. Paramedics and firefighters worked for nearly an hour to free her. Dan was at work when he received a call from Angie's father telling him about the accident and the hospital where Angie was being treated. Dan was surprised at how upsetting it made him to think that Angie might die or be seriously injured. He convinced himself that he had put that part of his life behind him as he tried to regain his balance. Dan met Angie's parents at the hospital. "Her injuries are not life-threatening, but she will be laid up for a few weeks," Angie's father explained. "We're going to try to find a caregiver to come in every day when Angie is allowed to go home. As you know, her mother suffers from the beginning stages of dementia, and I already have my hands full with caring for her. I won't be able to give Angie the help she needs." "I guess I could spend a few weeks helping her get back on her feet," Dan replied without hesitation. "I can do most of my work remotely, so she'll have someone around most of the time." "Why would you do that, Dan?" asked Angie's father. "You've made it clear that you don't trust Angie. Your divorce will be final in a few weeks. Why muddy the waters?" "She's still my daughter's mother, and we've been married for 20 years. I think I owe it to her to keep that in mind. It certainly doesn't mean I want to go back to her," Dan added. "That ship has already sailed." Angie was both surprised and relieved to learn that Dan was going to take care of her while she recovered. She was sure she could break his stubborn resistance with her feminine charms. She decided that the accident might have turned out to be a blessing in disguise. 2 days later, Angie was released from the hospital. Dan helped her into his car and drove her home. Angie was really sore and her left knee was swollen and stiff. The first night home, she fell asleep in the early evening and didn't wake up until sunrise. Dan was very attentive. He made breakfast for her and helped her go to the bathroom. When she returned to her bed, he explained that he needed to get away for a few hours for work. He needed to talk to his superiors about working remotely. His supervisor was receptive. He quickly agreed to Dan's request. For the first 2 days, Dan and Angie spoke to each other only out of necessity. After 20 years on the job, Angie knew how to read Dan's moods and sensed that the time was not yet right to implement her plan. On their 3rd day at home, Angie asked Dan, "Would you help me take a shower? I've only sponge-washed myself since my accident and I feel pretty dirty." "I think I can help you get to the bathroom and turn on the water. Will you be able to get up and wash yourself?" asked Dan. "I very much doubt it. You've seen me all over in the last 20 years, so why don't you shower with me? I'm not going to attack you. Hell, I can barely walk." Dan found himself naked in the shower, supporting Angie so she wouldn't slip and injure herself further. "Would you mind washing my back, Dan? I can't move my left arm." "Thanks, Dan. I feel much better now. Would you like me to return the favor?" Angie asked with a huge smile. Dan realized he was losing his resolve, so he quickly got dressed and left the bedroom. He decided that it was normal for him to find attractive the woman he had been married to and loved for over 20 years. It was not normal to consent to her having sex on vacation while she was married to him. He had solidified his intention to take the matter to divorce and get rid of his cheating wife. Dan tried his best to be cold and detached toward Angie, but she didn't seem to notice. She was always smiling and complimenting him on the simplest of occasions. A week after he started helping Angie, she bluntly asked, "Dan, why do we have to get divorced? I know I made a mistake, but I would never do that again. I had a wonderful, devoted, loving husband. I would never risk losing him again. I love you too much. I gave you many chances to come clean about that so-called vacation, but you kept lying to me. You insisted that you were a faithful wife while I saw videos of you having sex, and we never even thought of trying. The lie was the final nail in the coffin lid. I had to lie, Dan. I didn't know how much you had seen or heard, so I had to do my best not to hurt you. If you had only suspected what I did, I could have convinced you that nothing happened, Angie reasoned. The problem is that I saw you with those men as you were doing all sorts of things we never tried, mostly because you told me you were uncomfortable with it, and I believed you, Dan replied. Those videotapes were cursed. I still can't sleep at night without having nightmares about you and those bastards on the ship. I'd be happy to do all that and more for you if you let me, Angie promised. Why did I have to catch you sleeping with 5 amigos before you agreed to do it with me? Dan demanded. Because I wanted you to respect me as your wife and the mother of your child. I thought about doing it with you, especially on the way home from that trip, Angie explained. The problem now is that I don't know when to trust you, Angie. You've shown me that you're a liar, a slut, and a pretty bad driver. Dan was quite pleased with the way he had handled the situation, but he had grossly underestimated Angie's determination. One evening, while they were watching TV, Angie convinced him that it was okay for her to have some wine since she had significantly reduced her medication. Dan relented and brought her a small glass of wine and whiskey for herself. During the commercial, Angie rose to her feet and waddled out into the other room. Dan realized that Angie wouldn't need him for long. She returned with a bottle of whiskey and poured a generous portion into his glass. Dan decided not to protest and sipped the whiskey, enjoying the action movie. Angie insisted on a romantic movie, and Dan began to doze off. Angie knew he couldn't stay awake to heartwarming romances. Even if we get divorced, I want to do this for you every night until you go back to your apartment, Angie told him. I'm trying to repay you for taking such good care of me, especially after I disappointed you so much. Ben helped Angie onto the bed and went to the guest room. He found it hard to sleep as he thought about Angie and all that she had meant to him over the years. Would he be better off without her? He began to wonder. Angie met with her counselor every 2 weeks. She missed one session due to an accident, but insisted on attending the next one. She wanted Dan to know how serious she was about becoming a more stable and honest person. I have great news, Dr. Beckwith, Angie began. Dan has been taking care of me since my accident. I think he's starting to soften his attitude toward me. That's great news, praised the doctor. Do you feel that you realize how much you have hurt your husband with your infidelity? Will you be able to avoid similar situations in the future? I'll be sure of it, at least until I gain Dan's complete trust again, Angie declared. I'm picking up on something from what you just said, the doctor replied. Are you saying that you won't be pranking again? At least until Dan trusts you completely? And after that trust is gained, you'll have an affair? It's worked a few times over the past 20 years, Angie admitted. He trusted me completely, so it wasn't hard to have casual flings. He's such a nice guy. He never suspected. I found out last night that all I had to do was sleep with him and he would eat out of my hands. Today I'm feeling really good about myself. Angie, I'm not here to tell you how to run your life, but let me say this. If your husband takes you back and you cheat on him again, he will find out and quite possibly destroy him. Do you have any love for him at all? What kind of a question is that? Of course I love him. It's just that I like variety. Dan is a great guy and a dedicated lover, but he doesn't give me that special thrill I get when I'm with a strange man, especially a dominant one. I love Dan. Again, I'm not taking a judgment, but I would suggest that you don't really love your husband. He's just comfortable and secure. If you did love him, you would either be faithful to him or set him free. Don't you see that? Beckwith asked. 2 days later, Dan had to go to the office for a meeting. It didn't last as long as he expected, and at 3 p.m. he was already pulling up to Angie's house. He noticed a Lexus parked outside and wondered briefly who it belonged to. Angie was lying in her bedroom, and a tall, muscular young man was pressing her into the mattress. Angie didn't look, but she heard the bedroom door slowly open. Less than a minute later, She heard the front door slam. Tears ran down her cheeks. She knew Dan had come home and seen her. He always slammed the front door when he was angry. She had proved her love and set Dan free. This made her very sad. As the little mortar washed over her, all she could think about was that there was definitely something wrong with her, and how delighted Dr. Beckwith would be to hear of her ecstasy under these circumstances.